Yeah, can you come now? Let me see who all is there. Just give me 1 minute. Lynn, attendees. We have, yeah, Lynnette Abbott is there. Yeah, now we are just waiting for you to join.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Hello. I saw you on Facebook, Manju.
Yeah, I just come back. Chris is not around. I need to catch him. Yeah.
How are you, Professor Abbott?
Pardon? Excuse me?
How are you? Couldn't say hi to you yesterday. Sorry. Internet just dipped.
It's raining here.
Oh.
It's the beginning, coming into winter here. No, it's not cold, but it's our first real rain. Yeah, it's good.
Rained yesterday here also, but
I
think compared to Australia, it really rains very heavily there.
Yeah.
Am I audible enough?
I can hear you. Yeah. People are clicking in. Yeah, it's good.
So.
Unmute.
Yeah.
Now?
But our principal sir has not come. I need to talk to him.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. Just give me 2 minutes.
All right.
Hello, Chris.
Hey, hi, Lynn. How are you?
Hey.
Right. We haven't met. Rupam, is it?
Yes, Rupam Kapoor.
Kapoor, yeah. Hi.
Hi. How are you, Professor Walker?
I'm fine, although I am not familiar with all this technology, so you have to be patient with me.
I think we're all in the same space.
Right, yes. So now I'm going to, because I've got to get the screen. I've got to share the screen for the PowerPoint that I'm presenting. And I'm not actually got to get the PowerPoint working first. That would help. Where is it? Ah, right. So,
yeah, there we are. And our principal sir has also joined. I just get him in a minute, and then we can start with this at 2:30.
Move you people over to a different screen. There we are.
Yeah. And
We are in the unusual situation of having a very sunny day here today. which
that's
means that
good.
I'm in silhouette because I don't have a dark curtain, and the window behind me is making the camera can't actually deal with the contrast.
Yeah, our principal sir has come. So we begin with this formally at 2:30. In the meantime, I can have introduction to everyone. Sir, Dr. Vipin Agarwal, our principal, head of the institution.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
So this is Professor Chris Walker on the right side, and on my left is Professor Lynnette Abbott. Right. This is Dr. Vipin Agarwal, and this is Dr. Professor Rupam Kapoor.
Hello.
Yeah, she's in Delhi University, right? So we can just chat with each other, and 2:30 I'll start this.
2:30. Yeah, in what, 20
I'll tell
minutes?
you how many minutes from now. It is 4 minutes to go. 4
4
minutes.
minutes. 4
Yeah?
minutes. Okay.
Right.
Can you see my PowerPoint now then?
Not yet. No.
So I need to share the screen.
Not now. Don't do it now,
No,
Chris.
don't do it now.
Don't do it now, because your face will disappear then. Let everybody see that you have actually come. And when you need to do that, we will wait for you, then you do that. Okay?
All right. Righto.
Yeah. Because nobody will be able to see, and you and your laboratory. Just tilt your screen a bit. We'll see your microscope at the back, which I've been seeing for last few days.
You know what you're going to have to do? What I told you the last few days is speak more slowly, because.
Okay, yeah, I'll be slower. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
What do you want? You want a different view. You don't like me
No,
like this.
I like the view with microscope. I like that a lot.
Right. Oh, man.
Right.
What about?
Perfect.
That make you happy?
Yeah, that's very good.
We're here to make you happy.
Yeah.
Whatever I do about putting extra light on seems to make no difference at all. I'm still in silhouette. So I can't do anything about it. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's perfect. Everything is going just fine. We don't need to do anything.
Anyway, it's a big benefit if nobody can see my face, so that's all right.
No, face is visible. No, it will come brighter if you have some more light.
I can't get any more light. I've got all the light.
That's going fine. There's
Oh,
no
well,
problem.
maybe I could switch this light on, but I don't think it'll make any difference.
Window is at his back. That is also adjusting.
It is just so bright outside now that I'm in silhouette, and that's all I can do to deal with it, because I couldn't move my computers. Okay.
So we have 2 more minutes to go, and then I'll start.
So, so you can all hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
What are you all locked down in against the viruses?
Manjuji, Manju,
Yeah.
is the slides will be visible?
Yes, everything is. We have tried whatever we could do. Let's see how it goes now.
Right.
Yeah. We have 2
Because he
more
want to make
minutes.
it, Professor Walker want to make PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah,
So-
we had rehearsals. He'll be able to do it very well. Right on the time, not now, because nobody will be able to see him then. Only PowerPoint will come.
Okay, fine.
I'm waiting to be told what to do.
Yeah, not to create confusion. No?
Well, so we've got another minute according to me. So
Yes, 1 more minute. Yes.
what time is it with you, Lynn?
It's 4:59 p.m.
Oh, right. So yeah, we've got you went for. Do you have summertime now? Or?
No, we don't.
India
know.
is 2:30 p.m.
So
Yeah. So do I start? It's getting 2:30 now.
All right.
Should I start?
How many participants are there?
Huh?
How many participants are there?
100. I don't know. There might be 100 right now, but
Right.
let's see how it goes. For everyone, we're trying this for the first time. So let's see how it goes.
So are you going to do an introduction first?
Yes, yeah, that is what I'm saying. People will not be able to see you, so don't start your slideshow.
All right. And do your best to speak a little more slowly, please.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll try that. Yeah, please. Yeah, so we start with this now formally. Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to the 5th webinar hosted by Sri Aurobindo College and second from Botany Department. It gives me an immense pleasure in welcoming our guests, Professor Chris Walker, Professor Lynnette Abbott, and Professor Rupam Kapoor to the web space of our college. I would request our principal, Dr. Vipin Agarwal, to welcome our guests. I greatly appreciate his consistent efforts, because of which we have been able to make a good web presence. Sir, Dr. Vipin Agarwal. Maybe you can speak.
Good day, friends. Good day and a very warm welcome to one and all present in this webinar. On behalf of Sri Aurobindo College, University of Delhi, India, I welcome you all for reposing the confidence, and I thank you all for reposing confidence in us and accepting our request to be the participant in this webinar. We have received registration from all over the globe. I'm really delighted and excited to tell you that we have received participation from USA, UK, Costa Rica, Nigeria, Indonesia, China, and of course our own India. So we have large participation from other countries other than India. That's why we have restricted the participation to 100 participants only. And rest all are watching it from the Facebook Live, because you are here, this webinar is there on the Facebook Live. So I thank all the participants, and I especially thank Professor Chris Walker. Probably it is because of his popularity and his name in the field of botany, and especially in the field of fungi, that there is large participation. The moment we said our speakers will be Chris Walker, Lynnette Abbott, and Rupam Kumar, and all these three distinguished professors have excelled in the field of fungi. So we start receiving a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails that we want to get them. They requested us to get themselves registered. But since we are restricted to 100 only, so we are doing it on the Facebook also, so that they can, all our students and other participants who are not able to see it on this platform, they can see from the Facebook. As far as the Chris Walker is concerned, he is from the UK. He is from Royal Botanical Garden, Edinburgh, UK. Right. So, Professor Walker, thank you very much for accepting our request to be the speaker on this in this webinar. I would also like to thank Professor Lynnette Abbott, who is from Australia. She is from Australian University, and I'm thankful to you for accepting our request. I'm also thankful to our own Professor Rupam Kumar, who is from our own university, right? We have always a right over her, and the moment we say you have to be a participant and you have to be a panelist, she accepted our request. I also thank her, right? And in the end, because fungi is a new subject for me, I'm a student of commerce, so I don't know much about fungi, but I'm sure after this discussion, I will be knowing about the fungi also. So now I'm handing over, and once again, I thank all the participants. I welcome all the participants. And when there is a situation of gloom and doom throughout the world because of COVID-19, there is a silver lining to it. That because of this COVID-19, we are all locked down in India, so we cannot come out. So that's why we decided to take you on board through technology, through this webinar, through the Zoom platform. So I would say there is a silver lining to COVID-19, that we never thought in India that we can have an international gathering through webinar, through this platform. But this has given us an opportunity to make use of your time, and within from UK only, from Australia, and from India, from other parts of the world, we all can gather and we can talk on a particular topic. So I'm thankful once again to all the participants. I'm look forward for your talk and a panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Before I start, a quick thanks to all of you for being present here and watching us live on Facebook. We received volume registrations, of which 67% were from professors and faculty across the world. The countries from which we have good representation include Indonesia, Nigeria, Costa Rica, USA, China, Australia, and UK. We specially acknowledge the presence of Dr. Savitri Singh, ex-principal ANDC, Dr. Rani Gupta, Head Department of Microbiology, South Campus, Dr. Mahavir Prasad Singh, Principal Scientist at IRI, Dr. Laura Saulis, Assistant Professor in Costa Rica, and Professor Raghuvansh Singhal. I have another important thing to share here. Sorry, I'll be slower, Gresa. I have another important thing to share here. We all, Dr. Rani Gupta, Dr. Geeta Saxena, Dr. Nalini Nigam, Dr. Payal Mago, Dr. Mahavir Prasad Sharma, Dr. Sudha, Dr. Saloni, Dr. Surinder, Dr. Bhupinder Giri, Dr. Nikhat Naqvi, Dr. Anupma, Dr. Rama, Dr. Rajni Gupta, along with Rupam, would like to pay special tribute to our beloved late Professor K.G. Mukherjee on this day, which happens to be his birthday. Please forgive me if I have missed some names, but I think all of us found it to be a good occasion to convey our wishes for him. Before we begin, my sincere prayers for good internet and software function. Thank you. So, yeah, just give me 1 second. So I would first introduce Professor Walker about his academic achievements and then about the other guests, and then maybe we can start with the presentations. Introducing Professor Walker cannot be limited to institutions, honor societies, or professional bodies because presently he is working at Royal Botanical Garden, Edinburgh, UK, University of Western Australia, Cranfield University, UK in different research capacities. Among the researchers and the teachers, he is known for creating the phylum Glomeromycota of fungi. He has been member of different United States National Science Research Honor Society, including Sigma Psi, Kappa Phi, Gamma Sigma Delta. He is Emeritus Professor of Mycological Society of America and formerly member of British Mycological Society and Fellow of Linnean Society of London. It's indeed a privilege and prestige to welcome you, sir, to our small college, Sri Aurobindo College. We feel, yeah, maybe we can have a good round of applause for him, yeah. We feel honored to have Professor Lynnette Abbott, University of Western Australia, and Professor Rupam Kapoor, University of Delhi, as panelists for today's discussion. Lynn started her research career in 1974 and became Emeritus Professor in 2013 in the same university. Treasure of master work done by Lynn in the field of mycorrhiza continues to be most referred and cited one. She is a fellow of Soil Science Australia and Egg Institute Australia. Presently she is continuing research collaborations and extension in soil biology. So it is really indeed a pleasure for us and one of the rare opportunity to, so we welcome you here, Lynn. Yeah. Rupam is professor in the Department of Botany, University of Delhi. Her research focuses on different aspects of fungi, including mycorrhiza. She has also served as chairman of governing body of Institute of Home Economics, University of Delhi. She is vice president of Indian Mycological Society and associate editor of 3 Biotech Journal. We welcome you both, ma'am, together because you, yeah, so welcome both of you. Yeah. So before we invite Chris to start his presentation, I would like to remind all participants that there is a question answer icon at the bottom of your screen, where you can directly send questions to the panelists, and not to forget to share your opinion poll in the opinion poll link. Audience can freely interact with each other in the chat box and may ask for any query to our team webinar in the chat box. They will be attended with immediate effect. Before taking any further time, I would request Professor Chris Walker to take hold of the mic and screen, and maybe each one of you can mute our mics now. Sir, but before, everybody, I must convey my feelings that I am observing everybody, like a fun crowd. People are just crazy to listen to you like anything. So I give screen to you, and I think everybody I'm going to take this opportunity to their full capacity. Sir.
Right, well, thank you very much. First of all, apologies for the fact that you can barely see me, but this is a bedroom in my home. I'm locked down like everybody else, and for a considerable change, we've got nice weather, so the sun is shining behind me. Well, thank you, Manju, for inviting me to give this this talk. This, I must say, is a strange time for us all, so you'll have to bear with me. The technology is completely new to me. I have no experience of Zooms and so on. So if it all goes wrong, I'll blame Manju. Now, I'm not actually going to talk about fungi to give people any background on the fungi. What I'm going to talk is about a book of rules. Now, the names of, well, all organisms are governed by various codes, usually abbreviated because they have long titles to either the code or ICN, International Code for Nomenclature. And these govern the way that organisms are given names. For a long time, fungi were considered to be plants, and so they were absorbed in the what was then known as the Botanical Code. But recently, the name of the code has been changed. So it's and I'll talk about this with the first slide. And what I'm going to do is give a rundown of some of the main things from this code that affect mycologists, and particularly people working with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. I think that the best thing now is for me to go into the PowerPoint presentation. So let's hope it works. I believe that I now have to share my screen. And I'm hoping that you can see the PowerPoint presentation. Perhaps somebody can give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Oh, good. Okay. So what we have with this code, and this code is a big, thick book. This is an older one because nowadays you don't have to buy one. You can get it free on the internet. The last one I bought was in the year 2000. But a few, an hour or so on a Zoom meeting is not going to give you a comprehensive idea of what's in here. It's a book of laws. And one thing we all know about laws, if somebody passes a law, there'll be about 50 lawyers come out to try and argue which particular law means what to a particular situation. So there's always a bit of difficulty in interpretation. But nevertheless, this code works very well and helps to control the naming of the organisms that we work with. The International Code of Nomenclature for Algae, Fungi and Plants, which, as I say, is usually abbreviated as the Code or ICN, is just a book of rules and regulations. The book can be purchased if you want it, but if you put a link in the PowerPoint for those who want to go to the web version, which is exactly the same words as the book itself, but as in all laws, the actual book is the one that rules. The code contains rules, which are articles, they're called articles, and these must be followed. And then you have recommendations. Now, these recommendations are explanatory things, things that make matters clearer, but they're not binding, and sometimes people break them. It's best if you adhere to the recommendations, but you must adhere to the articles. And I have to say here that the code is a book of laws, but there's also a spirit of the code. And that is the way I try and view it, is that we need to adhere both to the spirit of the code, the reason why it was written, which is to bring stability to the names of organisms. If the rules are violated, the name becomes invalid, regardless of the quality of the taxonomic work. It doesn't matter whether it's the best or the worst. If you violated the rules, then the name is invalid. And there are some examples of invalid names which have been sanctioned as acceptable. And so, for example, the well-known one, the composite, was used for many, many decades. It's valid, but its proper name is the Asteraceae. Invalidly published names can sometimes be validated later, but the first validly published name takes priority. There are some violations of rules which render a name illegitimate. Now, that's not the same as invalid. Illegitimate names cannot be used, but they may be corrected by publishing a replacement name. And an example of this is the genus Gerdemanii, which I'll explain later on. And that was a name that was published, and at the same time, independently, another name was published for the same organism. And the first one took the priority, so Gerdemanii became illegitimate. And one of the things is problematic, is problematic, and that is like any law, if you can sort of try and work your way around it, but even the poorest quality of work has to be accepted if rules are followed. So if the rules are followed, if the articles have been adhered to, the name sticks. And the only way to then change the name is for somebody to write a scientific paper explaining what the problem was, and you can't get rid of the name, but you can, for example, if somebody's named a fungus that's already been named, there is a formal way of dealing with all that. I'm going to talk about the taxon now. Similarity of one kind or another, used to classify organisms into hierarchical groupings known as taxa. These are given formal ranks. Lowest defined rank is the subform. The highest rank is the kingdom, although some people talk about super kingdoms and so on. So I don't want to get into that. But the Glomeromycota, these are the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi and related fungi. Actually, I should say related fungus. because there's only one that doesn't appear to be an arbuscular mycorrhizal fungus, are included as a phylum. It can be called a division as well in the kingdom fungi. And now I should bring up that there is currently a rival view that the Glomeromycota, the phylum, should be reduced to the level of a subphylum. In this case, it become the Glomeromycotina. Glomeromycotina subphylum is a relatively new circumscription of the Mucorales, where they moved it into a phylum, and the Mucoromycota became this new phylum. And the Mucoromycotina, confusingly, perhaps people, is a subphylum both of the Glomeromycota and of the Mucoromycota, because it's just a taxonomic level. And so there is also a subphylum within the phylum Glomeromycota, and it's the same group of organisms. I don't think this change was well supported. It didn't make any sense of this one fundamental tenet of systematics, is that given a major group, such as a fungi, you should try and make the genetic distance between each taxon at a similar level. So it seems to me that if you split up, if you take the Glomeromycota and the Mucoromycota and combine them into a single phylum, and you'll just have to do that for the Ascomycetes and Basidiomycetes to bring them to the same level. And nobody has ever proposed anything like that, as far as I'm aware. I've put these two references relevant to this argument, and you can read them at your leisure. But Spatafora et al. 2016 was responsible for this change into a subphylum, and more recent arguments for maintaining that level of phylum are given in the next lot of references. It's worth a note here that in terms of dictation, in terms of the articles, the ICN allows taxa above family to be a matter of choice. So because no priority exists. So if you want to follow the Glomeromycotina under Glomeromycota, you can, or under the Mucoromycota, you can also. You just need to explain to people which scheme you're following. Now, here's a complete list of all the possible taxa for the kingdom fungi in descending rank. So the ones in red, phylum, order, family, genus, and species, are the ones mostly used in this group of arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. Not necessarily the case in other groups. There was, as far as I recall, just one subspecies or variety produced, and that was absorbed later. So at the moment, we only really use phylum, order, family, genus, and species. Some people are quote class, but it's very complex, and it's not worth, it doesn't affect most people working at, if you like, the coal face of biology. You really need to be dealing with what species, genus, and family largely, and to another extent, the order. Oops, seem to have gone off the wrong screen. Now, the families are all defined by a genus. And so I've put here all the families. Again, there are some other families in the literature, but these are the ones that I recognize at the moment. And if you want to delve into the deeper literature, you can find all of the work that some people have produced new families based on perhaps a single species, which I find probably is not the best thing to do. And I put a picture here of some of the spores. We base the taxonomy of this Glomeromycota. It's something of a sadness to me that we do this. It's based only more or less on the morphology of the spores and on now molecular aspects. But many years ago, I tried to persuade people that we needed to take a whole fungus approach to this. It's proved extremely difficult, and we still stuck with looking at the spores as a fundamental part of the fundamental characters that we use to define the morphological kinds of fungi. This creates a little difficulty too, in that it's becoming clear that the evolutionary rate of morphological change is very different from the evolutionary rate of molecular change. And so what's happening now is that we're trying to use both to define these taxa, and they're actually not, they're uncoupled really, which does create a big difficulty, because we find now that we have species morphologically identical, but they separate quite widely at the molecular level. I put in here, this is not for you to look at carefully now, it's because you'll be able to have, I presume, a copy of this to look at. It's got all of the current taxonomic hierarchy that I recognize, and there are all of the genera that are listed. If you look at the literature, you'll find, unfortunately, that most of the mycorrhizal work is based on a very restricted number of fungi. So there are all these genera and very little work done on anything other than 3 or 4 common ones. And a bulk of it is done, in fact, on a single organism, a Rhizophagus irregularis. And that creates problems for the biology, but it's got nothing much to do with the taxonomy and the nomenclature. Now, to get a name into the literature, you have to produce a publication which has to be, in the words of the code, effective and valid. And effective publication used to be defined very tightly as publication by distribution of printed matter. It didn't have to be published in a journal or anything. You could deposit it in botanical institutions and libraries, so long as there were sufficient copies that people could make access to it. Had to be available to botanists and mycologists generally. And for a long time, publication by electronic means was actually prohibited. But from the 1st of January 2012, publication can be effected by PDF, but it must be with an ISSN or ISBN number to be effectively published. The date of effective publication is extremely important because the principle of priority applies. So that's the first effective publication of a valid name fixes the use of the name and attaches it permanently to its type specimen. And this means that if somebody publishes a name for a species, and somebody later publishes another name for the same species, the second name is not valid and would be illegitimate and is lost. I'm going to say something about quality here because it's very important, quite easy to publish a species description which nobody can understand. The name is then stuck in the literature. And here's one, for example, there's no rules governing the quality of the journal or the standards of reviewing or even the scientific standards of the work. It shouldn't be a problem because we all should be self-disciplined scientists and we should work at the highest level. But there are sometimes papers published which, well, to me, are bewildering. And here's an example one, Glomus reticulatum was published as Glomus reticulatus. At the time it was thought that Glomus was, excuse me, masculine, but it's actually neuter, so the name had to be changed, the ending. And the type material was lodged in a herbarium but has been lost. This is the sole illustration of this fungus. And I'm afraid it's impossible to have any idea what it was. And so the name Glomus reticulatum remains in the literature, but there seems to be no way of working out exactly what it is. Valid publication is defined in publication according to the articles 32 to 45 in the code, and you can look those up if you want, but in summary, members of the Glomus, this means that all species are valid since the first G. macrocarpum was published. Glomus macrocarpum was the very first fungus published that is in the Glomeromycota. And it was in 1844, and nobody had any idea about it being an arbuscular mycorrhizal fungus. It was just a fungus that the Toulans found in Paris and other areas in France, and they gave it the name Glomus macrocarpum. Glomus apparently means a ball of wool, but they don't look much like balls of wool to me, however. It has to be in the correct form according to the rules of the code. So an introduction like this is not going to allow you to just go off and do that. You need to take the code and understand it and read it. And it isn't the lightest of reading, shall we say. On or after January 35, up until the 1st of January 2012, it had to be accompanied by a Latin description, but that was changed, and now it can be either in Latin or English, but it can't be in any other language. So if it doesn't have a Latin or English description, the publication is not valid. And on or after the 1st of January 1958, it has to be published with an indication of what the type is, and that type is a representative of the organism. Before 1908, that could be an illustration, but after that, with a few exceptions, it must be a specimen or a single collection, a single gathering, as it's called in the code, of multiple individuals. So, for example, there have been species in the Glomeromycota named from with a type of a single microscope slide with 2 or 3 spores on it. Really, that is not an adequate type, and you need a large number of specimens. If you've got a, shall we say, a palm tree or something like that, you can find it quite easily from a single specimen, but not with fungi. So you should be using a good collection of multiple individuals, but they have, of course, to be the same organism. Now, in regard to the typification, the taxa of the ranks of family or below, only of family or below, the name of the taxon is defined by nomenclatural types. And some of the family is based, I mentioned that earlier, is based on the generic name. Because they were not required before the 1st of January 58, there are names for which no type is available. But for any time beyond that, there should be types available. And the type is normally a specimen. I've explained this, I'm going a bit further into it. It dictated a single specimen, but the specimen doesn't mean a single leaf or a single spore. It means a single gathering of the same organism. And the name becomes permanently attached to the type specimen, and this is very important. It should be conserved in a permanent fungarium or herbarium or similar official collection, so that it's always available in perpetuity for people to examine if they need in the future. Whoops. Now here's a conundrum. Type. Does type mean typical? The code specifically states that the type need not be typical of the species. Now that sounds nonsensical, but when you think about it, if you gather a new species, by definition, it's the very first time this thing's been seen, or in science, known to science. And most things in biology are distributed along a normal bell-shaped curve. And so chances are this specimen that you've collected is somewhere in the middle here and might well be reasonably typical of the organism. But it could be at either end of the curve. It could be that you found an extraordinarily unusual specimen and used that as a type to define the species. And in this case, it would not be typical. And the consequence of that is that I think that you need, from time to time, redescriptions, because as science progresses and more knowledge is known and more collections are made of an organism, you find that wherever you took the type from, this bell-shaped curve should be filled in, and you'll find more about the variation of it. And so every now and then, it's a good thing if an organism is redescribed in the light of more knowledge gained. So there are different kinds of type specimens. These are 5 of them. There are several others, but I don't think we need to go into those at the time. But when you define a fungus, the type itself that defines it is known as the holotype. That's the type specimen. It's lodged in a herbarium or a fungarium or some permanent collection. But there's also an isotype, which is a bit of the same thing, basically. So here's an example, holotype of Scutalospora castanea, and these are the spores of Scutalospora castanea. This is a single spore. And just out of interest, this is a curious thing called a germination shield, which is a very complex pre-germination structure found in this group of organisms. Not in all of them, but in some of them. But when we put the holotype in E, Edinburgh, additional microscope slides were sent to OSC. I'll explain these abbreviations later. And that additional material is the isotype. So you have a holotype and an isotype. They're bits of the same thing. And it's quite a good idea to lodge isotypes when you describe a new species, because types do get lost. Even sadly, during the world wars, the herbariums have been destroyed along with many type specimens. And so if there's some of it in another herbarium, that's a good backup. If the authors fail to designate a holotype, then any specimen cited in the protologue is called a syntype. And if more than one specimen or collection of fungi is included, they're all syntypes. Oh, there we are. And here's an example. The holotype of Endogeny versiforme consisted of two different organisms. Here you can see there was one which was, I unfortunately didn't have time to put scale bars on this, but this is 3 or 4 times bigger than this. Two different spore types forming clusters. These are big clusters of thousands, many hundreds of spores. And one of the types were without color and produced small spores, and the other was very large spores and brightly colored. So these were syntypes. So the original collection was split, and the part originally described as a holotype is in the herbarium H, and the other is in Burns. So I've forgotten what H is just now. Oh dear, sorry, but you can look that up. Now they're ISO or isosyntypes in Burn. In other words, they're part of the same collection. Oops. If there's confusion over defining the type, because more than one collection included, what you do is you take one of those and define the name based on that. And that's called an electotype. And the electotype has to come from the original holotype collection. And here's an example, Rhizophagus fasciculatum, Basionim, that's the name upon which it was based, was Endogeny fasciculata. But it turned out it actually was a collection of what was originally thought to be a sporocarp, a spore body. It actually contained 3 different organisms. What is now a Rhizophagus species. It also had an Endogeny species, and it also had some spores from a tuber species in it. So it was a mixture of 3 different organisms. And Professor Gerdeman separated them and selected the glomoid spores in the mixed culture as a lectotype, thus defining the species, which was then moved into glomus from endogeny and became Glomus fasciculatum. And this later has been moved into Rhizophagus. And here are 2 little bits of the actual specimens which define that fungus. If everything gets lost, holotype, isotype, syntypes, paratypes, everything gets lost, a new type is needed. And here is where you can choose an organism that wasn't the original type and define it to define the species. And once defined, that collection takes the place of the missing holotype. However, if somebody finds holotype, isotype, syntype, or paratype material at some time in the future, then the neotype loses precedence. And here's an example where one might be needed. The type material of Glomus flavisporum, which was labeled as originally named as Endogeny flavispora, I'm saying it appears to be lost. It is lost. I have confirmation from the herbarium that it's no longer available. Nobody knows where it is. If a collection is needed to define this taxon, a new collection can be used, and such collection would become the neotype. But when you see that this is the entire description or the illustration of Endogeny flavispora, it's very hard to know how you would find a suitable organism to name as a neotype. And finally, the one I'm going to mention is paratypes. When you define a species, you lodge the holotype, but you can also select another number of organisms which you consider to be the same thing, and you name them as paratypes. Now, the paratypes, by definition, are supposed to be exactly the same species, but a different collection, different organism. I was involved in defining the species Acalospora spinosa, in naming it. And at the time, we had some collections from Mexico, which we thought were the same species. So we named them as paratypes. Now, it turns out that the holotype of Acalospora spinosa, which is from North America, and the paratype now are listed as different species. And it's based on the ornamentation on the wall of the spore. In spinosa, you've got very long spines ornamenting the spore surface. And in tuberculata, you've got little tiny tubercles rather than spines. And curiously enough, it seems from my observations that there's a northern-southern division between these species. I've only found Acalospora spinosa in north of the, well, pretty well north of Florida, really. Tuberculata in the southern hemisphere, and I found it, it's known from Mexico, but I've also found it in Brazil and in Malaysia. So it's an interesting possibility, not proven, that these organisms are different, represent different parts of the, or occupy different parts of the globe in terms of hemisphere. And finally, there's a new and what I consider to be a very helpful kind of type. It's the eptype. Since 1994, it's been possible to supplement the type with extra material termed an eptype. And this is very useful because many species are defined from holotypes which are either in poor condition or have been lost, or in modern day times from species which are represented only by preserved material and have never been found since, and we now need molecular analysis. So somebody who is who consider themselves to be sufficiently knowledgeable is able to define an eptype, which can be a new collection that represents the species. It doesn't replace the types, but it's good for additional explanation and illustration. And here the rules are clear. The principle of priority applies to an eptype, and so it must be followed unless it's shown to belong to a different taxon as the major example of the organism. And giving an example here, Walker and Vestberg defined an eptype for Glomus claroideum, which now is Claroidea glomus Claroidium, because the type was not of sufficiently good quality to define a species. In this case, it was not sufficiently good quality to define it either in molecular terms or in morphological terms. And so I think it's particularly useful for arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, as you can now use a sample from a living culture as an epitype, and that living culture can then be made available to other people for future research. We see all sorts of names talked about in the botanical codes or the nomenclatural codes, and some of them are quite commonly used, but the most common, and these are called NIMS, the most common to be known as synonyms, and that's when you've got the same name being applied to two different when you've got different names being applied to the same organism. And there are two kinds of these. There are homotypic synonyms, which used to be known as nomenclatural synonyms. They are synonyms in which this different name is given to an organism with the same type specimen. So you've got, this can happen in a number of ways. Quite often it's that the thing's been described in different parts of the world with people not knowing about a previous description. And so you get, I'm sorry, I've lost myself here. That's the heterotypic. Homotypic synonyms are where a name has been given to the same organism, the same actual specimen. And these are a matter of fact. You can't argue with it. It's the same specimen. But if somebody, say in India, names a species, and then somebody in the United Kingdom names the same species later because they didn't know about the Indian work, then this is a heterotypic synonym. They're on different types, and the name cannot apply to two different organisms. So you've got, you cannot have a species with two types, and you can't have different types for the same species. Sorry about the complication there. This word I mentioned, basionym, earlier, is not uncommon for an organism to be renamed because new information has been uncovered that means it must be moved, for example, to a new genus. So here's an example. Ian Hall described Glomus infrequens, that later the fungus was moved to a new genus, Entrophospora, as Entrophospora infrequens. The original name is called a basionym. Thus, Glomus infrequens is the basionym for Entrophospora infrequens. Nicholson and Gerben described the fungus Endogeny heterogama. That was later moved to Gygospora by Gerdeman and Trappi. And even later it was moved to Scutelospora by myself and Ian Sanders, and Francis Sanders. And thus, Gygospora heterogama is the basionym for both Gygospora, that should be, for both, I'm sorry, that should be Endogeny heterogama and Scutelospora heterogama. All these names are based on the same type, and they're homotypic synonyms. I'll have to make a correction on that slide. You heard me mention Harvard University, some of the abbreviations for herbaria. And there's a list of kind of official names, abbreviations. Harvard University is FH. Oregon State University is OSC because when the original abbreviation was made, it was Oregon State College. And that list can be accessed very readily from the World Wide Web. Sometimes authors will make up their own abbreviations. You won't find those in the Index Herbariorum. For example, Janus Głoskowski cites his titles as being lodged at DPP. There's a recent one by Pan et al. On CISAAS for the herbarium in Shanghai Academy of Sciences. These are not on the list, so the abbreviations aren't always listed. But if you come across an abbreviation, and you don't know what it means, and you want to know where is the material lodged, then you can look up the abbreviation. For example, if you look up E in Index Herbariorum, it will tell you that this is the herbarium at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Edinburgh. Now I've shown these. I'll just flick through these to the next slide. I'm going to talk about the principle of priority. Oh dear, whoops. I have mentioned this before. If two or more authors apply a name to a new species, there can only be one correct name, and the principle of priority means that the first validly published name takes priority over any other name for the organism. Here's an example. Gerdemania and Pachyspora were named independently in the same month based on the same type specimens. The type specimen was originally called Glomus scintillans. Pachyspora was named a few days before Gerdemanii, and the authors of Gerdemanii did not know about the Pachyspora being published, and therefore Pachyspora took priority. I put in a link here to quite a nice little web page which goes through some of these rules, the 8 main rules of nomenclature in plants, and they apply to fungi too. There's all sorts of errors creep in due to the complexity of the code. It's quite easy for anybody, including people who've done a lot of it, like myself, to make errors. Nobody's perfect, I'm afraid. Sometimes they don't matter much. Sometimes they can actually be based on unsupported work. Sometimes they can be apparently deliberate violations of the ICN spirit or letter. Sometimes they can be just due to ignoring updated works, and sometimes they can be actual errors of interpretation of taxonomic characters. Confusing errors that don't really matter. As an example, in this species where the Archispora species was revised, and this fungus Glomus gerdemanii was cited as a representative or as the type, the holotype for Archispora gerdemanii. But in that citation, it gave 2 different fungi as the holotype. Now, if this had been a completely new description, then that would have probably made the descriptions invalid. But because this was based on an existing type, the type of Glomus gerdemanii, this citation of the second collection has no taxonomic or nomenclatural effect. which is just as well because it wasn't the same species. And that will have to be worked out sooner or later. New names can be published without adequate evidence. For example, this species Glomus hoyi was transferred to Simiglomus. They didn't refer to the nomenclatural type. They based analysis on two cultures that did not share the characters used to define Glomus hoyi. And both of these cultures that they used have since been shown to belong to Glomus macrocarpum. But incorrect names stick around. This is why you should be very careful to follow the rules of the code if you can. For example, a paper in 2019 talked about using a mixed species of AMF in growth experiments, and they said that they'd use Simiglomus hoyi. Well, there we are. Confusion, once established, can be difficult to clear up. There can be only one correct name for a species. Rules can be violated, and that can cause all sorts of problems. Dagiard in 1896 and 1900 published Rhizophagus populinus. And from the reading of that work, it's clear he erroneously thought it to be a pathogen, but he illustrated an arbuscular mycorrhizal fungus. And for many, well, decades, it was very widely accepted that his interpretation of an oomycete pathogen was incorrect. And the name has been applied to some arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. In 2014, Seaverding et al. Decided to reject this interpretation. No idea why. They applied the new name Rhizoglomus to all species of AMF except Rhizophagus populinus. Now, myself and some other workers challenged this and in a publication in TAXON, and we made an application for conservation of the name Rhizophagus, which has to go to a committee, the nomenclatural committee, and be decided upon by majority vote at the International Mycological Congress. Now, when a challenge has been made like this, the code is quite clear and says that the status quo should be retained. So the name Rhizoglomus should not be used at the moment. It may be that when the nomenclatural committee meet, they will reject the proposal to conserve Rhizophagus, in which case Rhizoglomus may well become valid. But until then, people should not use that name. And it is confusing, especially as some actual species have been described now with the name Rhizoglomus. Generally speaking, it seems that the bulk of authors who actually work in detail with arbuscular mycorrhiza are now sticking to Rhizophagus, maintaining the status quo. If it is changed to Rhizoglomus, it's going to make big problems for literature surveys and so on also. So there are good reasons, I think, for retaining Rhizophagus. Use of authorities or authors after their names. At one time, it was very common for journals to demand that the author quoted after first submission. You had to quote the authors, the people who described the thing. And that, fortunately, has been changed. And if I can find it. The reason it's changed is because in the words of the Botanic Code when it was introduced, it's downgraded author citation after scientific names to merely a complement, a desirable thing, because, and here's I'm going to quote, past editorial policy has sometimes enforced the uncritical addition of author citations in non-taxonomic papers. If you use the authority or the author after a species name, it's telling people that you understand the way that author used the name. If you just add it because you've looked it up in a list or a book, as was previously enforced, you don't know what exactly it means. So, for example, Glomus macrocarpum, Tulan and Tulan, is the way they described it. You're saying that you understand what they did. If you use Cetrospora nodosa, which was Scutelospora nodosa under Blaskowski, you're saying that you understand that this is the way Earl, Silver, Goto and Sieverding understood what was originally Blaskowski's description of Scutelospora nodosa. So it's a statement that you understand the way the authors used the name. So it's far better to drop it all together unless you need to use it. And it can lead to a false sense that the full implications of the name are understood. I've put in some useful URL links here for people to find the code. The names of fungi are all in the Index Fungorum and Species Fungorum, so you can find the latest names, or it's reasonably up to date. The actual code itself I've listed already in the list, in the presentation earlier. So just really finally, knowing the rules and recommendations and how they should be applied just ensures that taxonomists and non-taxonomists alike understand how to read and write about the species names. And the preamble of the code says the purpose of giving a name to a taxonomic group is not to indicate its character or history, but to supply a means of referring to it and to indicate its taxonomic rank. It's not about science behind the names. It's not about the biology. It's about the nomenclature. And it's worth considering another quotation from the preamble. The only proper reason for changing a name are either a more profound knowledge of the facts resulting from adequate taxonomic study, or for the necessity of giving up a nomenclature that is contrary to the rules. And as a final bit, which I hope will be far more interesting than my talk, I put in a photograph of some fossil from the Rhynie chert 411 million years ago. This is before roots had evolved, and these fungi are identical morphologically to some present day acalosporoid spores. And we think that symbiosis with glomeromycotan fungi occurred well before plant roots evolved. So I thank you for putting up with my presentation. It's the first time I've done a webinar, and I hope it wasn't too bad. Thank you.
It was too good for everyone. See, in the message box also people are writing that they are very thankful to you for such a nice webinar and such an informative lecture. But can you just remove these slides, Chris?
Remove the slide right now then, just a minute. I have to stop the share, is that correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
please
Stop share.
stop the share. Yeah.
Right.
So now, because yeah, it was a very informative and very nice and presentation. But what has happened is we are a bit behind schedule, and we are a bit missing listening Lynn and Rupam as well. So what we do is they've been attending the questions as well of the participants. So maybe Lynn first will express her views in mycorrhiza, and then she can take up some of the questions she wants to ask, and then maybe Rupam can follow Lynn. So I welcome Lynn to say her opinion and words about this.
Oh, thank you, Manju. I first would like to thank Chris for giving this presentation. I've worked on mycorrhizas for many years, but I've steered right away from taxonomy, as he knows. But we are very fortunate to have you give this presentation today. I mean, especially given that this is a very complicated area. And so I'd first like to thank you for explaining it. But I'd like to ask you a question about something that is interesting to me from this taxonomic space. And that is that there's a big chance that many people who work on mycorrhizal fungi, on the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, misidentify fungi. And so this is a different thing to the defining and describing them. But what do you want to make a couple of comments about this side of the question, which is where a lot of us are involved in working with the fungi, but are we working with the right ones? Are they the names we're giving them, or are we wrong sometimes?
Well, it really is a difficult problem, is that, as you well know, it's people. It's partly is due to the nomenclature, I suppose, because a name gets applied to an organism at some time, and it's carried along with it when it's sent along, when the organism is passed to somebody else to work with. There's two channels to this, if you like. One is where the same organism is passed along and its name happens to have changed. So, for example, shall we say, I'm just trying to think, oh yeah, Glomus mossi, it's changed now to Phonelliformis mossi, but it's the same organism, and it doesn't really matter. You can look up either name and still be working with the same organism. However, if we take Glomus intraradices, that's a big problem, because the name Glomus intraradices was misapplied to what has now become what became Glomus irregularis. Both of these have been moved into Rhizophagus. So Rhizophagus intraradices and Rhizophagus irregularis are different organisms. They're different species. It just happens they both were originally identified in North America, but one was from Florida and the other was from Canada. Now, even until just last month, a new paper came through and it said Glomus irregularis synonym, sorry, not Glomus, Rhizophagus irregularis synonym Rhizophagus intraradices, but they are not synonyms. They are different organisms. And there is a great deal of confusion, and that is to really, The way I often say it, it's not like going to the supermarket getting a fungus for research from somebody. It's not necessarily what it says on the tin. So you need to be sure that the organism you're working with is named correctly. And the Rhizophagus intraradices irregularis is a real problem for interpreting the literature. It's almost impossible to actually work out which species people were referring to, except that I can tell you that Rhizophagus intraradices is an extremely uncommon organism in my experience. I've only seen it in nature maybe 3 times, and this is based on the molecular analysis since. But it's identical morphologically. I cannot separate it from Rhizophagus irregularis or from Rhizophagus aggregatus. So there are at least 3 Rhizophagus species that I can't morphologically separate. You need molecular analysis for that. So I don't know how to solve that problem. It's a problem that's been with us for many years. One of the things I would like people to do is to start and use some other organisms. There's too much in the literature that says that a mycorrhizal effect basically is what happens if you put Rhizophagus irregularis with the plant, which kind of implies there's only one such thing. And we need to be looking at these. I mean, I think now there are currently 300 and some species described in the Glomeromycota. And I think, I haven't actually added this up, so somebody will no doubt correct me, but I don't think there is literature on the effects of more than half a dozen of these species. So what do all these other organisms do? And why is everybody rushing to do growth responses on Rhizophagus irregularis when there's all this delightful material available for original research? Is that explaining it?
Yeah.
Given a very good explanation of why we need to be cautious, and it was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe now Professor Rupam can express. Can you unmute your mic, Rupam? Yeah.
Good afternoon, all of you. I concur with Professor Abbott. It is really a pleasure and a privilege to hear you, Professor Walker. And also the opportunity this webinar has given us to interact with Professor Abbott is also priceless. Now, this audience consists of many undergraduate students and certain faculty members who are teaching in various colleges. So my role here is to represent them and to ask few questions which may not be of very high level, but would help them if they hear it from an expert, that the questions they have, I would be asking if you permit, and I'm sure you will be glad to answer them, Professor Walker, as well as Professor Abbott. The first question that was asked to me, as many of the students could not get registered or get the chance to, as the response was overwhelming. So they've been sending me the questions on my emails and my WhatsApp as well. So the first and foremost question is from the 2 participants here, Professor Praveen Gehlot and Dr. Paul. Professor Praveen Gehlot is from India, and Dr. Paul is from Lempeng University, Indonesia. They want to know whether there has been any further classification given beyond 2010 by your group, Professor Walker.
No, basically, I think we haven't done any formal classifications. I've been retired for since 1996 now, and although I'm affiliated with the Botanic Gardens and with the UWA, I live in Gloucester in England. I'm nowhere near either of these institutions, so I don't have sort of institutional place. I'm looking for a paper. The most recent work that I worked on anything along these lines was where we made some changes and corrections, and that was the Redeker et al. Paper in mycorrhiza in 2013. This corrected some errors, including a major error of my own where I actually put a fungus in the wrong genus. So I'm not immune from mistakes myself. There is a need for a major review, but I'm afraid it's not going to be me that does it because I don't have the resources and I can't any longer. I mentioned in my, I didn't actually say this, but it's in the presentation. I'm not convinced that paid for publications have been a good thing, because it's proving just about impossible to get papers published in free journals, formerly free journals. They take months and months and months because everybody's got money and they pay for a quick publication. I don't know, I think it's a bit of a problem. It means that there's a torrent of papers coming out and, well, I'll be controversial here. I think the quality of reviewing has taken a considerable decline over the past decade or so. I leave you all to make your own judgments.
Oh, so because we are behind schedule, I would just again request maybe Dr. Lynnette can take one more question and one from Rupam as well. And because the audience, the questions should be audience questions, those who are there asking, then we got to wind it up because we are behind the schedule, right, for everyone. So
I'm always behind schedule. I apologize. I'm always behind.
So Lynn, yeah, your mic is off, Lynn. Yeah, I can put it on. Yes.
I can't see another question. There were a few earlier that were addressed to Chris, but I just can't see one that would be easy for me to answer at the moment.
Yeah. So maybe if Rupam has, yeah, sorry, Lynn, sorry.
I was following, but I think they were more for Chris.
Yeah. So Lynn, if you want to address our gathering for anything on mycorrhiza, maybe apart from this?
Well, I think Chris has presented an excellent platform, and one of the areas that I'm a little concerned about at the moment is the rapid growth and interest in inoculation with mycorrhiza, as you know, and I feel that this is a space we need to be very cautious about. So I'm not saying that this is not a thing that can be done, but we just need to be careful that when we're buying inoculum or we're selling it, we just have to be rigorous in what we're saying is there. And the other side of the question is really about these fungi are very complex in their function. And so it's not always the case, even if the fungi are present within a root system or in the soil associated with roots, that there's something that they're doing which we can measure and value. Even if their value is there, often it's difficult to value. And things change with time, colonisation starts and goes through the time. It's a complex area.
It's very complex, I know. And you know, yeah.
Go on, yeah.
May I just say something there about that? I absolutely concur with this this thing. There was many years ago. I got into trouble some international way by saying that it was time people stopped thinking that a mycorrhiza was a mycorrhiza was a mycorrhiza. They are not all the same things. And presenting if you like, an untested, unknown mixture, very often of alien organisms into the soil and expecting it to do something like magic is fanciful. One thing I would like to mention is that I personally do not like this term biofertilizer.
Yes.
A fertilizer is a mineral nutrient that if you apply will do something to increase growth of plants, welfare of plants, if there already is a lack of that nutrient. These are, if you like, they are more to be considered, in my view, as plant promoting organisms, but not as fertilizers.
Thank you.
So
Hello.
Dr. Rupam wants
may I request
Yeah, sure,
Professor Rupam
please.
to speak?
Yeah, she
May I
wants to
request
say
Professor Rupam to speak something on the topic? Professor Rupam, please.
One thing more we would like to know, we have never tried to our hands on taxonomy, knowing these are difficult organisms to work on. You as a stalwart on taxonomy of fungi, what were the challenges which you feel they are not there in other groups like Dicaria? We don't find these challenges in Escomycota or Presidiomycota. We see that maximum number of changes ever since 2007. Abbott et al. Have given the new classification. Later on, classification in 2006. Most of them have tried to fiddle with these basal fungi, Zygomycota and Critidiomycota. And as we follow the classification of fungi, we see that there are a lot of changes in Glomeromycota. What is special about these organisms that is challenge for all the taxonomists working on them?
Well, I don't know, to be quite honest. A lot of, you know, taxonomy is to some extent to do with the people who are working in the taxonomy, and they're very few. In this day, here we are discussing widely on the internet without any difficulty at all, but communication among the taxonomists working in this group is virtually zero. I don't know why. You have to draw your own conclusions about this. It would be better. There's never been an international meeting of taxonomists working on this group.
Yeah.
There was a wonderful meeting in Canada, the Kenrick, about the whole fungus many years ago, and it sorted out many of the problems of fungal, if you like, not exactly taxonomy, but of the way the approach to fungal naming was. We need something like that, but it's not possible. It's too small a group of people working. There's not enough money available. Money's part of it. There's just not enough money to make a big an international conference or anything of that sort. I don't know how a colleague of mine, some of these names, for example, I think the nomenclature is nonsense. I'll be quite candid. I think it's nonsense. We've got single species families being defined. Well, I don't know. We've got genera with one species being defined based on a single analysis of a small part of the genome. We've got species being defined that are morphologically identical, but which have slightly different clades in molecular analysis. Really, then, without some greater consistency and some greater cooperation, and I'm afraid some more money, I can't afford to get a single fungus sequenced. I just don't have any money, and so you can't do it. You can't really do I'm going to be a bit personal here. My wife says that I'm stupidly trying to run a research organization, a university department in a bedroom with no staff or students.
You're an inspiration to many, Professor Walker.
Yeah. So see, because I'm understanding that this is getting very interesting, but somehow, you know, I feel that. So what we do now is I'll give mic to 3 of you one by one for your final address to the audience. And in the meantime, I'm inviting my team who is working behind the screen, on screen, so that they can introduce themselves, right? So maybe Professor Crick can start with addressing the final note to the audiences, and then in the meantime, I can bring them on screen. Yeah, sir.
So you want me to say something then?
Yeah, final note.
Okay.
Yeah,
final comment, sir.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for putting up with me for the last, hour and a half, I suppose. I don't know, it seems to be dragged on. I hope it wasn't too tedious for you. I've tried to introduce this matter of the importance of following the correct rules and regulations, and of understanding something about the way names are given to the organisms with which you work. I make apologies for my not very clever use of technology, but I think I can say as an excuse that I'm getting rather elderly. Thank you very much for listening.
Professor Lynnette, please.
Do you want?
Professor Lynn.
I haven't anything else to say except that we're very fortunate to have Chris speak to us today, and all of you people out there who have been listening. This is
Thank you very much.
So I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Maybe Professor Rupam?
Manju, I actually wanted to show a couple of slides, but I think we'll give it a skip maybe some other time.
No, ma'am. No, please. Professor Rupam, if there are few slides, you can show it.
Okay, thank you. Because we are already exceeding the time.
Manju, can we go ahead?
Yeah, 2 slides.
Dr. Manju?
We can try for 2 slides. In the meantime, I'm getting in the front line, the people who are behind the screen. There are a few people in my team. They're gradually coming. In the meantime,
good-looking people.
Please don't leave, Lynn. Please, sorry, excuse me. Please don't leave. We are here for a while. Please don't leave.
Can you see the slides?
Professor Kapoor.
Yes.
Please show the slides.
Please share the. Yeah, you can try sharing the screen. It's at the bottom. Then everybody else will disappear. Only your screen will be there.
The screen, I have already shared the screen and.
But it is not coming. Just try it again.
What should we do? Should we give it a skip?
Just move your cursor around. You will see one green square which says share the screen. Move around your cursor.
No, I can't repeat it. Sorry. The technology is equally new to me.
Anyway, we will have a special lecture from Professor Rupam on this topic.
It was intended for the teachers and the students.
You assure us
for Professor Walker and
that
Professor Abbott.
for Aurobindo College, you will be giving a special webinar.
Thank you. Thank you.
For our students, you will give a special webinar.
Thank you, sir.
Manju?
Yeah. So,
Manju?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah. So,
Please invite the students.
Now I formally say thanks to my panelists, especially Professor Walker, Professor Abbott, and Professor Rupam, for so generously contributing to this one and spending their time and efforts. And I understand this was a very short notice. And also my thanks for bearing with this technology hitches. And I also want to thank this internet, at least it didn't ditch. right? So there's no formal Thanksgiving. That was it. And I would just take few minutes to introduce my team who was working behind the screen. And they really have worked hard, I would say. So I just started because I don't see there is any direction in the screen. So I can start from, I'm just starting randomly. There's no seniority, juniority here. So in the left bottom of mine, we have Dr. Hema Nagpal. She's from economics department, but she's
in the middle.
And things. So she wholeheartedly contributed to this work. And we are here just because of her, because she contributed for many things.
Thank you, ma'am.
Then we have Sasta Gupta. I always pronounce her name wrong, and I apologize for that, but it just goes fine. You know, all this technology, what is to be brought forward, what is to be left, I used to consult her. What do I do now? She's from Commerce Department, but because it was a college work, she's always there for that work. And she never, you know, expressed anything, even if I called her very late in the night.
Pleasure, ma'am. It was my pleasure.
Then we have Mr. Rahul Dev. He is assistant professor in our botany department. And we have Dr. Isha Gunwal. She is also assistant professor in botany department. Then I have two student representative. We have a society here, Botanical Society functioning. Akanksha Chaturvedi in the center. She is the president of our Botanical Society, and she has contributed in a lot of ways, meaning all banner preparation or anything, she was there. Then on the right of mine is Sarthak Tyagi. He is the smallest boy, I would say. He's a first year student. All technology part of this program was handled by him. So that was my way. I wanted to say thanks to all of them. And with this, we come to an end of this program. I would not end this meeting. I will take 2-3 minutes because we have a tea time session at principal's room for 5 minutes after this program ends. So I would request my panelists to be here, and we will just say bye-bye to the audiences, and we get back together again for tea in principal's room. Right?
Thank you.
Thank you all the participants.
Thank you very much for the audience.
Thank you.
Very, very motivating and encouraging, and they really, you know, I was just reading the messages. Their messages were really encouraging. Thank you very much, everyone. So maybe this meeting is officially ended from my side.
Thank you.
So just be there for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you can chat among yourself. I will just invite the other people whom I want to invite.
So, see, first of all, I would like to thank Professor Chris, Professor Lynnette, Professor Rupam for participating in this webinar. I know only 3-4 days back, Dr. Manju requested all the 3 panelists, and you all accepted it wholeheartedly. I'm really grateful on behalf of the college, on behalf of the University of Delhi, Professor Walker, Professor Lynnette. And Professor Rupam is from our own university, so we have a great right on her. And I'm sure you, madam, you will come to the college also for giving your personal presentation, and we'll keep a separate webinar for you so that you can interact with the students of the botany, or not only of our college, of Delhi University, very soon. When you will give us time, Professor Rupam?
Anytime, sir.
Huh?
No commitment.
Next week only? Next week?
Yeah.
Next week?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So Manju, you wrote it. Professor Chris also, I mean, after some time, whenever you have time, please let us know so that we can fix up with you, right? Another meeting, because the students there was a lot of interest in your talk. So I'm sure the students will be benefited by your knowledge, by your vast experience in this field. Same with the Professor Lynnette, I suppose. Manju?
Hanji, yes, sir.
Please fix up next meeting with them.
Sir, because even I'm new to this one, I was operating this software for the first time. So I may be given 5 minutes so that I prepare the principal's room for a cup of tea. The meeting I have officially closed. Yeah, please. So you keep busy with them. I'll just arrange tea for everyone. Yeah.
Thank you, Manju.
We'll have a virtual tea.
Yes, everybody will go to
We'll
their
have
kitchen.
a virtual tea session.
Everybody will go to their kitchen and pick a cup for themselves and enjoy it together.
Well, I might leave you now because it's my dinner time.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, so
right.
sorry. Yes.
And
Very-
Right.
so, am I understanding you're saying that we're going to get a cup of tea and then reconvene with the cup of tea in this meeting? Is that what you said?
Yeah, that is what
No, not really. I just wanted to have 5 minutes informal discussion. Maybe Professor Rupam like to interact with you when we are here. You never know when we are going to meet again. So because whatever function happens in our college, we always do it this way. After this is over, we go to principal's room, sit there for a while, and we introduce you to the other senior colleagues in the college. So maybe I have 1 or 2 more. I will invite them in the meantime. That is what I'm calling. And then maybe we can meet each other for 5 minutes and then leave. Yeah?
So we'll stay a little longer.
Mr.
Maybe
Rupam,
5
you may
minutes.
ask some questions to
Yeah, to the experts, yes.
Okay, understand.
Meantime, you make use of this time, you can ask some questions to them.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying. You can interact among yourself.
All right. I was hoping that you would say I could go and get a cup of tea and come back.
No, not at all. Not at all.
hold them on.
Yeah.
Could I ask, Rupam, can I ask you
We Indians are very good hosts, sir.
about
So,
your research?
Sorry?
What is your main interest
Lynn
in?
wants to ask something. Yeah,
We
Lynn, please
Indians are very
tell.
good hosts.
She knows this. You know this, sir? She has this pukhraj in her finger. Ask her. She does havan, not you will be doing. She does so many havans. And you know that her favorite dish is mung dal. Do you know that? You can talk to her about this also because the meeting is officially over. So somebody needed to remind me. I need to just stop this live show now. Sorry for this one. Yeah. I have stopped the live show now. Now you can chat among yourself. I'll just take 5 minutes.
Right, Lynn, you said you've got to go for your dinner.
Oh, well, I can wait a little longer.
Hey, nice to see you after so many months. And what a situation we're all in, all locked into our rooms and things.
So it's many years ago, Chris first came to Western Australia, to our university, and has maintained a link. And he has spent a lot of time trawling through pot cultures that I set up many years ago. But unfortunately, they're not in a good shape anymore.
No, this is very sad as well because it was such a wonderful collection. But it's the same thing as when I was asked about the problems of taxonomists. It's money. It costs a lot of money to do these things, and you had what I consider the best collection of arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi in the world, and it's gone. And I have the same thing. I kept over 200 different cultures, and they're lost.
But I think the other part of it is that we took the idea of looking at the fungi that we had in our soils and not getting fungi from someone else. I think that was a very important thing because we understood so much more. And if I was to start again, I would do the same, because if you go and buy some and use it, I think you don't really understand. I mean, a lot of the things that we learned were because things were so difficult. And that's how we found out lots of things, because we struggled, we couldn't understand it. And so by working with our own fungi, that was very good. But it's difficult, it is hard. And also it's a skill. it's not everybody who, we had some very good people working in our group who we trusted with our fungi, and other people weren't so good at it. So this is, it's a skill as well to study these.
One of the things which I come from a forestry and forest entomology background originally, and the number of pests and diseases that have been transmitted around the world through careless use of organisms sent without too much thought, which were supposed to be good, or which were attached to something that was supposed to be good. We've seen pandemics or epidemics of tree diseases. Currently, you know about the problems with eucalypts and oomycetes. We have moths and things. What thought is ever given to somebody packing up a fungus from soil, because they're grown with plants, they're not sterile, they could well have other pathogens and other organisms associated with them. I don't know how you could possibly guarantee, apart from the root organ culture method, but how you can guarantee that something grown in a plant in soil and then packed up and sent halfway around the world can be completely free of other organisms, and they may well be dangerous.
Very true.
Rupam.
I want a help or an assistance from you, Professor Abbott or Professor Walker. In India, we are still struggling to standardize the in vitro culture of AM fungi. So if there is any provision to learn from you in your lab, Professor Abbott, or probably Professor Walker is working from his home now.
Yes.
Can you suggest?
Well, I missed the beginning of what you said then.
It's regarding in vitro culture, root organ culture of AM fungi. We can, problem with this, we cannot sterilize. We tried every time, it had a lot of infection after growing hairy roots. So that was the problem. So if I get funds for a few days or a month, is there any chance I can visit your lab to learn this technique?
Well, I think there's a group in Belgium. Chris, do you know the group in Belgium?
Yes. The problem is at the moment everybody's locked down, so they've cancelled all the courses. But there is a university at Louvain-la-Neuve, the Catholic University of Leuven, run a very good course on root organ culture, and it's run at least twice a year, I think. I can, if you send me an email, I can send you the details. But with a word of warning, it does appear from what I see that about the only fungus that reliably, the only group that reliably can be produced in root organ culture are Rhizophagus species. And I consider these to be weeds. So they
host has asked me to start my meeting. My God.
That's common. That
so I have brought in some of my senior colleagues whom we usually take in the principal's room after the discussion. So here we have Dr. Sangeeta Kaul in the left bottom. She is from chemistry department, but she enjoyed your talk and she's been writing consistently on the chat box. Then we have Dr. Meeta Mathur. She's from English department. And Chris and Rupam, I'm introducing because I'm going to do it again one day, whatever way it worked today. So she's from English department, and we usually get together whenever we organize a function to know each other. And then we have Dr. Anjali Arora. She is from Commerce department, and we usually form a group whenever we are doing anything in the college, right? So all of are joining me to say thanks to you all. Then we have Dr. Maria. She is joining us from Indonesia. She has not put her video on, but Maria, would you like to talk to Chris or maybe Lynn or Professor Rupam Group? You want to ask some questions? Can you hear me, Maria? No, she is not answering. Maybe yeah, she's coming on screen. Yes, she's come. Good. Yeah, so you want to ask anything? So she's having maybe probably some namaz time or something, but it was good to show you that people have joined us from different places, and because we were doing it for the first time, so that way also, you know, a bit of whatever happened, but anyway, so.
Very well to get it all together.
Well,
it is just coming. I was praying that the things should go well, but thank you to all three of you especially, and to Maria as well, because there were a lot of people from Indonesia joining this. So should we say final bye-bye now? Though I don't feel like, because I was enjoying it a lot.
right,
So
well, bye-bye. I am desperate
It was
for that.
very nice. Thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lynn.
'Cause
Thank you.
I'm desperate for a cup of cha.
I would end this meeting now. Yeah.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Leaving the meeting. Thank you.
Yeah. Do I end this now? Bye.
Bye.
Yes, bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Yeah.
Yeah.